Picture this scenario. It is 3:00 a.m. on a Tuesday. Not a movie, just real life. Suddenly the grid goes down.
Right.
The entire city block you are standing on just goes pitch black. Or maybe you're in your office 30 floors up and the fire alarm isn't a drill. There is thick, acrid smoke actually rolling down the hallway.
That's a nightmare, isn't it?
In that precise, heart-stopping moment, who are you looking for?
Exactly.
Are you scanning the panicked crowd for a gender studies professor to help you deconstruct the intersectional social dynamics of why the fire started? Or are you looking for a man with an axe who can kick down a locked door and drag you to safety?
It is a totally provocative question, absolutely. But it really cuts right to the bone of the material we are covering today. And look, before we even wade into these waters, and trust me, they are deep and they are choppy, if you appreciate deep dives that aren't afraid to look at the uncomfortable truths of our modern world, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button right now.
Yeah, you are definitely not going to want to miss where this conversation goes. We are diving into a book that is effectively a grenade thrown into the middle of modern discourse.
For sure.
It's an ebook titled Crisis Management. Resilient Men, There's No Such Thing as a Feminist in a Fire by Conrad Riker. And let me tell you, this isn't your typical 5 steps to a happier you kind of self-help book.
Not at all. Riker actually describes it as a field manual forged in real fire. And forged in fire is really the only way to put it. This isn't theoretical philosophy from someone sitting in an ivory tower somewhere.
Right.
Riker draws from over 30 years of studying crisis response. We are talking earthquake zones, corporate meltdowns, active combat scenarios. He is pulling data from government after-action reports to make a very specific, very sharp point about how we survive when the systems fail.
And that point is addressing a specific type of cognitive dissonance that I think a lot of our listeners feel, especially the guys out there listening to this deep dive.
The whole mission of this deep dive is to address that tension. You know the feeling.
Yeah.
On one hand, society tells you that your natural instincts, stoicism, aggression, command, are toxic.
Right, that they need to be medicated or educated out of you.
Exactly. But the moment the system crumbles, the moment the floodwaters rise, those same people are looking at you to save the day. It is a massive paradox.
It's the feeling of being told to sit down and shut up, right until the moment the lights go out. And look, this is an ultra-long, incredibly incisive manual. We're going to cover the absolute essentials here, but we can only really scratch the surface of the history and the tactics.
We really are just scratching the surface.
So if you want the full combat-tested neural rewiring techniques, you need to check out Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now to buy the ebook. Again, it's called Crisis Management by Conrad Riker.
Let's get into the meat of it. Riker starts by identifying the trap most men fall into today. He calls it the vulnerability trap.
This part really stopped me in my tracks because we hear this narrative constantly in media, in corporate HR seminars. Men need to be more vulnerable. Men need to share their feelings.
Yeah, it sounds nice. It sounds highly evolved.
But Riker argues this actually a setup. How exactly does he frame it as a trap?
He calls it a classic double bind. A double bind is a psychological situation where a person receives conflicting messages, and no matter what they do, they lose.
So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Precisely. Society verbally demands, men express feelings, tell us what you're going through, but then ruthlessly punishes them when they actually do it. And he doesn't just claim this anecdotally, he brings the receipts.
He brings the Boeing example, which was just brutal to read.
The Boeing CFO. So during the 737 MAX hearings, which was an incredible high-stress environment, this executive cried. He showed genuine, raw emotion regarding the tragedy.
And in a world that values vulnerability, he should have been applauded.
But you would think so. He was being human.
But that is not what happened at all.
No. His company's stock value dropped $2 million in 40 minutes.
40 minutes.
40 minutes. The market algorithms and the investors saw tears, and they didn't read empathy. They read instability. They read risk.
And Riker contrasts that with the female CEO, right?
Yeah, contrast that to General Motors' female CEO around the exact same time. When she wept during announcements about plant closures, the media praised her as refreshingly human.
That is a staggering double standard. One gets praise, the other triggers a massive sell-off.
It has a literal price tag. Riker points to a Stanford study of 10,000 employees showing that men who display visible emotion in a crisis are penalized 27% more in leadership perception metrics than their female counterparts.
97%.
Your tears literally cost you money and status.
But it's not just in the boardroom either. I think where this hits home for a lot of our listeners is the dating market. Riker talks about Schrodinger's alpha male. What on earth does he mean by that?
This is fascinating data. He pulls back-end data from Cupid and Tinder. 89% of women claim in surveys they seek assertive partners.
Okay, pretty standard.
But later, in long-term evaluations of those same partners, they rate that exact assertiveness as domineering. But the kicker is the vulnerability aspect. A Match.com study showed that male profiles admitting to things like anxiety or depression got 80% fewer messages.
80%? That is almost a total blackout.
Yes, even though 70% of those same female users listed emotionally open as a non-negotiable requirement in their bio.
So they say they want an emotionally open man.
But they swipe left on him the second he actually shows it.
Yeah.
It is revealed preference versus stated preference. As the book quotes comedian Bill Burr, they want you to cry, just not during the playoff game.
Wow.
Riker's core argument here is that gender equality is a social construct that works when the AC is on and the Wi-Fi is working. But it is a biological impossibility in survival contexts.
And that brings us to the hardware, the actual biology. Because Riker argues that things like testosterone aren't just about big muscles or, getting into bar fights. He reframes testosterone as biological software.
That is a crucial distinction. We often think of hormones as just influencing mood, but Riker argues testosterone is a tool for compartmentalization.
Meaning what, exactly?
It is the chemical that allows you to function when your amygdala, the ancient fear center of your brain, is screaming at you to run away. He references a Cambridge study regarding Wall Street traders.
Oh, right. This was the study about market volatility.
Right. Traders with higher baseline testosterone levels made 30% more profitable decisions during market crashes.
During the crashes, not the boom times.
Exactly. Not during the good times, but when the floor fell out.
So when everyone else is panic selling, the high testosterone brain is actually locking in and focusing.
It is remapping risk. It suppresses the fear response just enough to see the logic in the chaos. And physically, it goes even deeper. UCLA neuroscientists proved that testosterone physically restricts the tear ducts.
Wait, literally, like physically restricts them.
Literally. Men produce 60% fewer tears than women because the ducts are smaller, and the hormonal trigger required to activate them is higher.
Yeah, it's wild.
Riker argues this isn't just social conditioning, it is physiological. We are built to have dry eyes during a crisis so our vision doesn't blur when we need to aim or drive.
Riker uses some pretty intense examples of this playing out in the real world. The one that really stuck with me was the Chilean miners in 2010.
33 men trapped underground for 69 days, deep underground. Now, Riker notes they didn't form a committee to discuss their feelings or hold a vote on every single decision.
They didn't pass around a talking stick.
No, they formed an instinctive hierarchy almost immediately. Shift leaders were appointed based on mining expertise, not popularity. Psychologists from the University of Santiago noted that this rigid, vertical structure reduced panic by 90% compared to mixed gender simulations they had run.
And then there's the flip side of that, the Swedish submarine experiment.
This was a really stark contrast in the book. The Swedish Navy attempted a gender-neutral submarine crew just to prove it could work. According to the data Riker pulls, the experiment allegedly lasted only 14 days.
2 weeks. That's it.
2 weeks before, they had to quarantine the female crew members for biological reasons related to hygiene and close quarters stress. Riker doesn't mince words here. He calls it a failure of ignoring biological realities in favor of ideology.
He also mentions Fukushima, right? The nuclear disaster.
Yes. In simulations based on the Fukushima disaster, male-dominated teams evacuated civilians 22% faster than gender-balanced teams. Riker's point isn't that women aren't capable in other areas of life. It's that in immediate life-or-death crisis response, hesitation is fatal.
He has a really specific stat about that hesitation, the 19 seconds.
That comes from UN peacekeeping units. The claim is that gender parity protocols, meaning checking in with everyone, ensuring consensus, added 19 seconds to ambush responses.
To a civilian sitting at home, 19 seconds might not sound like much. That's checking a text message.
But in a firefight, 19 seconds is an absolute eternity. It is 3 full reload cycles. It is the difference between life and death. Riker calls this the cost of equality in crisis. He suggests men need to adopt the N+2 rule used in Swiss nuclear plants.
What is that rule?
Redundancy. N is what you need. +2 means you have two backups. Systems fail, the grid fails. You cannot rely on the system to save you. Men need to be the backup for civilization. You need two extra backup systems for your skills and your logistics.
This idea that men are the backup for civilization really requires us to look at how we got here in the first place. Because Riker argues that our institutions weren't always like this. He spends a good chunk of the book talking about the history of institutional capture.
He does. And this is vital for understanding the whole picture.
Before our institutions were captured by feminists and Marxists, as he outlines it, they actually recognized these biological differences as a feature, not a bug.
Right. He uses the Iroquois Confederacy as a prime historical example. Now, we often hear they were a matriarchy, right? That's the modern textbook version.
Yeah, that's the standard history class takeaway. Peace, love, and matriarchy.
But Riker clarifies the actual dynamic. Women had absolute authority over the harvest in the village, but they were strictly banned from war planning. It was total compartmentalization.
So it was a true separation of powers based on biological roles.
Exactly. But when French missionaries arrived and forced equal input into battlefield decisions, claiming it was more civilized, the war parties fragmented. Allied tribes collapsed because the decision-making loop simply became too slow.
Interesting.
Riker sees a direct parallel to modern corporate structures. He cites Victorian mills in the 1830s as another example.
Oh, this was fascinating. This was when they tried to let women supervise the heavy weaving floors.
Yes, and productivity dropped 15%. But the book points out it wasn't because the women weren't smart or capable managers. It was because the male workers slacked off.
The natural dynamic broke.
The men stopped competing for status because the hierarchy had been artificially altered. Riker argues that men naturally organize in hierarchies based on competence, and when you disrupt that with forced equality, the system degrades.
So when did this whole concept of toxic masculinity actually become the buzzword? Because it feels like it is everywhere now. You can't escape it.
Riker traces it specifically to academic feminist workshops in 1999. He claims the term was weaponized to pathologize traits that are actually incredibly useful for survival things like ambition, stoicism, and aggression. He calls it the virility feedback loop.
Break that down for us. What is the loop?
The loop is the inherent contradiction of modern society, meaning society secretly craves masculine competence while publicly pretending to hate it. We love the Winston Churchill speech about blood, toil, tears, and sweat. We get goosebumps. We love the deep voice of a CEO raising venture capital. Yale researchers actually found deep voice men raised 200% more capital.
So we literally vote with our dollars for the deep voice.
Correct. But then we turn around and call those exact same traits toxic in the media. It creates a feedback loop where men are totally confused about what they are supposed to be. You see it in the corporate world with things like the golden skirts in Norway.
The forced board quotas.
Right, mandating gender ratios instead of relying on pure meritocracy. The competence hierarchy gets replaced by an optics hierarchy.
And it starts way before the boardroom. We see it in schools, too. The story Riker tells about the boy expelled for drawing soldiers.
In Maryland,
Yeah.
an 8-year-old boy. Riker points out that while he was punished and suspended for completely natural boyish behavior, drawing heroes, soldiers, conflict girls drawing other things, were left alone.
So it starts early.
He argues this is a systematic suppression of male instincts from childhood. It leads to what he calls the empathy trap.
The empathy trap. That sounds exactly like what happens in modern HR departments.
It is exactly that. HR departments and sensitivity trainers prioritize feelings over what Riker calls logistics dominance. Look, if a factory is exploding, you don't need empathy. You don't need someone to pass around a clipboard and ask how the fire feels.
You need a man who can carry 12 workers through the flames.
Riker cites a factory explosion in Texas, where the men who saved lives were the exact same men who had been labeled problematic by sensitivity trainers just the week before for being too rough or direct.
The problematic traits became the survival traits the second the system failed.
Precisely. And Riker's argument is that our institutions, education, media, corporate governance, have been captured by an ideology that values feelings over function. And that works fine right up until the crisis hits.
Okay, so we've defined the trap. We see the history of how these institutions were captured. What is the actual solution for the guys listening? Riker talks about building the fortress, and the first pillar of that is logistics dominance.
This is where we move from theory to practice. Riker says you need to stop trying to process your feelings regarding the state of the world and start preparing. He recommends storing 9,000 calories of food per person.
9,000 calories. That is a very specific number. Why that amount?
It is a 3-day buffer for high exertion survival. It is the difference between preppers, who are often mocked in the media as guys building bunkers for zombies, and what he calls patriarchal preparedness.
Patriarchal preparedness, I like that term.
It is about quiet competence. When the snowstorm hits and the supermarket's empty in an hour, you aren't fighting a stranger for the last loaf of bread. You are secure. You are an asset, not a liability.
And you are not doing it alone either. He talks a lot about brotherhood infrastructure,
Yeah.
but he is very clear that this isn't a support group.
No, not at all. He explicitly differentiates between a therapy circle and a war council. Men bond shoulder to shoulder, conquering an objective. Women bond face to face, sharing feelings. Riker says if you try to force men into the face to face model, it fundamentally fails.
He mentions the cracked egg theory from the Marine Corps to back this up.
Yes, between 1999 and 2005, the Marines tracked recruits. Those who cried during boot camp, who showed that visible vulnerability society says they want to, had a 37% higher dropout rate. Drill instructors called them cracked eggs.
37% is huge.
Riker's advice is to form networks that exchange reliability. You don't need a shoulder to cry on. You need a guy who can help you fix your transmission or clear a fallen tree after a storm.
And part of that reliability is stoicism. But he doesn't frame it just as a philosophy. He calls it psychological Kevlar.
That is a brilliant image. Stoicism isn't repression. It is armor. It keeps the unit alive. He contrasts the modern circle of feelings with the Belichick protocol.
Like Bill Belichick, the football coach.
Exactly. Short answers: focus on the next play. Do your job. Riker notes that after a high-stress mission, British commandos would drink 1 pint, list 3 tactical improvements, and then officially ban further discussion of the event.
Wow.
That is how you process trauma without wallowing in it. It is functional.
We also have to talk about the legal and financial side. Because the fortress isn't just physical beans and bullets.
Riker is brutal here. He talks about financial shock absorption. He suggests using game theory tactics in divorce and business. He outlines the 3F rule: find the forms, file fast, force evidence,
Find, file, force.
speed, and aggression. In a legal battle, particularly family court, he argues the system is heavily stacked against you. You cannot rely on fairness or the truth coming out eventually. You have to rely on superior documentation and speed. It is about being the first mover.
It is intense, but when you step back and look at the big picture, Riker is saying that all these social constructs, the gender studies, the HR workshops, the forced quotas, it is all a luxury.
It is a luxury of a stable, energy-rich civilization. Riker's summary is haunting. He says, when the floodwaters rise, the social constructs wash away, and biology remains.
Yeah.
In that moment, the narrative doesn't matter. You are either the man with the boat and the axe, or you are the person waiting on the roof to be saved.
And nobody's waiting for a feminist in a fire.
That is the bottom line.
Look, we have covered a ton of ground, but crisis management goes so much deeper than what we can fit in here. Riker talks about specific combat-tested neural rewiring techniques that we didn't even have time to touch on today. You really need to read the full manual.
Absolutely. Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks right now. Buy Crisis Management by Conrad Riker. If you are a man feeling that pressure, that dissonance in modern society, this book is the toolkit you have been waiting for.
And if you want to stay updated on the collapse, the economics, the societal fractures, you need to follow the author directly. Go to Substack and follow at Conrad and Riker. That is where the deep analysis happens.
And please, if you got value from this deep dive today, make sure to like and subscribe to our show. It helps us keep bringing you this kind of unfiltered, hard-hitting content.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Riker poses this question. If society collapses tomorrow, if the grid goes down, if the supply chain breaks and the trucks stop running, will your emotional intelligence keep your family warm? Or will you wish you had focused on logistics dominance?
Dominate the aftermath.
Thanks for listening. We will see you on the next deep dive.